2022 was quite the year for the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. Jeb Williams, Director, joins me today, and we're going to talk about 2022, some of the challenges, and what we can look forward to in 2023. I'm Mike Anderson with the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. Jeb, 2022 was quite the year. In April, we had a major blizzard that kind of broke the drought. What does the rainfall and the water do for our wildlife?
Well, it means everything for it in North Dakota, both from a fisheries perspective and wildlife perspective. We go through many drought cycles throughout the state from the fisheries perspective, and obviously a roller coaster, but habitat on the landscape, what our grassland acres look like, makes a big difference as far as the moisture level that's the input into that. And so we've had it tough these last couple years, and last spring we definitely broke through that, and then throughout most of the summer months stayed pretty wet in most areas too. So things definitely looked a lot better.
From a fishing aspect, that filled some of the lakes and especially Lakes Kakawea, the walleye fishing on these lakes have probably never been better than they are today.
I think across the board, whether, northeast North Dakota, southeast North Dakota, anywhere in the state, we've never had better fishing opportunities, and especially from a walleye perspective. We know people are always really excited about walleyes, and our fisheries division has heard that, and they've delivered on it. And there's no better opportunity than right now to be catching walleye across the state, whether it's through the ice, whether it's open water, small waters, big waters, and it's just tremendous opportunities that we're seeing out there throughout the state. And in most of these areas too, not just catching walleyes, catching nice walleyes. It's just hard to sum that up, I think, as far as what that actually means, other than it's just really spectacular to see those opportunities across North Dakota.
Jeb, in 2022, our development crew was busy maintaining boat ramps and adding new boat ramps for access.
Yeah, well, that comes along with it, right? I mean, when we're managing a record number of lakes, and we know that the interest out there occurs obviously with boat fishing, but both boat fishing and shore fishing. But when we're talking boat fishing, then you need access. And so putting in those additional development areas, boat ramps, and then the infrastructure that goes along with those areas takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot to maintain once they're in. And that became, really a talking point about a year ago with, obviously one of the biggest, fishing waters in the state, Lakes Kakawea, with the low water levels that had been in place due to the drought conditions. And therefore, that was going to mean a lot of access areas were high and dry. So our development folks, worked really close with a number of, parks and rec, a variety of different municipalities out there that help us manage those areas to try to get better access into those low water boat ramps that were put in place a number of years ago due to drought conditions. And so the development crew actually doubled in size, which, I think needs to be put in perspective, though. It went from 2 to 4.
Right.
But it gave the development division an opportunity to utilize a few more bodies and put in some new access areas across the state, which in previous years probably wouldn't have been able to do. And so with the number of bodies of water out there being managed, obviously access is a big component of that.
Sticking with fisheries, Jeb, 12.5 million walleye fingerlings were stocked in 176 water bodies. That's pretty incredible.
It's phenomenal, and nobody does more of it. And that's a tribute to our fisheries department as well. Is that just a tremendous effort out there. Because we know that there's some natural reproduction that goes on in some areas of North Dakota with walleye, but not a lot. And so it takes a really big effort from the fisheries crew to be able to put that stocking effort in place, and of which we talked about it earlier, seeing the rewards of that stocking effort, but also have to have that growth that goes along with it. And we're very fortunate in some of these areas of the good management and some of the natural forage that is in some of these areas to give those fish the kind of growth that they're able to see.
And that partnership with the hatcheries.
Huge, yeah. We're one of the states that doesn't have a state run and operated fish hatchery, but we do have a really good partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on 2 national fish hatcheries, which play a huge role in what that fishing product looks like in North Dakota.
Jeb, one positive thing this year with aquatic nuisance species. Explain that.
Well, we didn't have to put a news release or any outreach effort on where we found aquatic nuisance species on a new lake where we maybe found zebra mussels. So that was really good news. And you know, it's one of those things that obviously there's a lot of things being done, a lot of folks putting in a lot of hard work to try to slow that spread of aquatic nuisance species, and knowing that there are some things that we can do to make an impact. But one of the things that is so critical is that people out on the landscape need to care about it. They need to identify and be educated on those areas that they can help, because it's one of those issues that no matter how many rules or regulations or positions we put in place, people need to care about the issue to help prevent the spread of aquatic nuisance species. And I think so far we have really good buy-in from folks on that aspect.
Jeb, let's move away from fisheries and go to wildlife. We mentioned a little bit the rainfall create a lot of awesome habitat for our nesting birds and so forth. Explain that.
Well, anytime we have good rainfall in North Dakota, obviously we're going to get good production on our landscape as far as grassland growth and crops. I mean, all habitat considered that are important to those wildlife resources. And the last couple of years have been tough. You know, the amount of cover on the landscape has been very minimal. You know, crop growth in certain areas has been, you know, in some areas next to none. And so this year was definitely welcomed for, you know, wildlife, and obviously, you know, our farming and ranching partners out there too that had a much better year, and with rainfall returning and staying for a good chunk of the summer, but not surprisingly drying out in the fall as well in some of these areas to where, you know, that'll be a concern heading into next year. But at least there is a lot better habitat, a lot better growth on the landscape going into the spring of 2023, which generally speaking means good things for our upland game birds.
So we're heading in the right direction.
Well, I think so. We're definitely in a better position, looking like that direction is much more positive than what it had been the last couple of years.
Jeb, 800,000 acres in our plots program. That number has been stable for the last few years. Pretty good.
It is, considering the change of landscape that we've seen, and just the change of, you know, different programs out there, and just the change of land use, right? The competition for land. I mean, the price of property. When people are buying property, they need to make a return on that, right? I mean, that's pretty common sense and understandable. And so the opportunity for conservation practices on the landscape is getting a little tougher. And so that's something that to where our folks need to work a little harder, and they have been, and just to maintain that acreage out there for our private land open to sportsmen program. And so that's something that is pretty remarkable. It's always something that we've concentrated on as far as the quality. We know that we could inflate that number within a month probably to get over even 1 million acres, but the quality wouldn't be as good as it is right now. I mean, that is something that we try to put a lot of pride into, that when somebody goes out to a plots parcel somewhere, that they're going to have a reasonable opportunity at harvesting something. And so that's something that's always on our priority list.
Jeb, 2021, we had a major EHD outbreak, pretty much in central North Dakota. 2022, good news there.
Yeah, we didn't have any issues with the EHD, which is not uncommon after a pretty extreme outbreak that we had the year before. There are some areas that, as most EHD outbreaks go, there were some areas that were hit harder than others, and we're seeing, you know, already some positive signs in some areas, and then some other areas not so much, that will take a little bit more time for those areas to repopulate and fill back in. But surprisingly, it happens fairly quick, especially in these areas where good habitat exists, and that those deer want to be in those areas, you know, maybe even move in from some fringe areas to occupy that is void because of some of the mortality that took place. But, you know, overall, there's no doubt that with some of the mortality we saw in some of those areas, it's going to take a little bit of time, and especially for the mature deer, right? There's only one way that a person can get those mature deer back, and that's by turning the calendar over several years. But from a population standpoint, a couple years, 2 to 3 years, I think people will be very surprised what is back on the landscape.
Jeb, in 2020, we worked with the 3 affiliated tribes and transplanted some bighorn sheep there from Montana. How are they doing?
Doing exceptional, and again, another highlight of tribal partnerships and tribal engagement. We've had a great relationship and a great project in place with Standing Rock for a number of years on elk, and then now with 3 affiliated tribes with bighorn sheep. And so the reproduction rates have been off the charts in that area up there, so doing really well. And that's a really positive sign. We knew that those sheep would do well in North Dakota. So the close proximity to North Dakota, similar habitat types, just big, robust sheep, but then also putting them in the prime habitat that they are. And then the commitment that we've had, with managing and partnering with 3 affiliated tribes has gone a long way as well. So lots of interest, lots of positivity in that story.
Jeb, our game wardens, they're having a lot of interactions with the public.
Yeah, so one of the things, Mike, and this is pretty simple, pretty simplistic, but customer service is really important to me, and that's been something that we've talked about a lot. And that interaction with the public, we know sometimes that what we do, managing public wildlife in a state that is privately owned is hard. And it's something that, but what we need to do though, we need to keep communicating that in all aspects. We know that there's some things out there that irritate people, but the more communication, the more contact we have, the better. And we're seeing that with our enforcement. We're seeing that in other aspects of the department. We don't want people to be surprised with what the department's doing. We know that sometimes it's not going to be 100% agreement, but we don't want people to be surprised with what we're doing. And so having that interaction in the field with our wardens is tremendous. And we know the amount of interaction that goes on out there. The amount of interaction is extremely high compared to the number of citations. And so that just shows, the interaction that's taking place out there, the positivity of, those discussions, talking about, trends in wildlife numbers, different areas, different things, just that interaction to where people can rely on game wardens for that being that source of information that is so critical to people.
Jeb, not only the game wardens have a lot of interaction, but we started a new program to communicate with the public, the North Dakota Outdoors podcast with Caleb Bendel and Casey Anderson. Explain that.
Yeah, so we're trying to be kind of hip, Mike, when it comes to keeping up with what we need to do out there. And podcasts have obviously been alive and well for a while. And a lot of people spend a lot of time, whether you're traveling, whether you're doing whatever you're doing, listen to podcasts. And so the department got on board with that and started here this fall and has done a tremendous job of bringing in. It just gives that opportunity to have that real informal conversation, but yet getting out some really important messages that are really interesting to people. The podcast world really captivates a lot of folks with how that message is communicated. And so we're hoping that we're able to do the same thing. And I think so far, based on the response and the information we've been providing out there, I think we have. And I think it just gives the department just another avenue to communicate with the public about what we're doing as an agency and how we're managing your dollars, your sportsmen's dollars.
Jeb, let's switch over to Hunter Ed. 5,000 people on an average year go through that course. 700 plus volunteers. Pretty incredible program.
No doubt, but like every program, it's also something that you need to evaluate over time and need to make some changes. And so one of the things that I think became really obvious and it was somewhat forced was obviously the pandemic with COVID and having to navigate a little bit away from in-person classes to some more online type classes. And I think it presented an opportunity also for the department, because over the years we've heard and seen a number of different times and occasions where that can become a hurdle to some folks as far as prioritizing that over basketball or their volleyball, those types of things. And on one hand, you have people that say, well, if that needs to be their priority to get there. Well, for some kids though, they're just going to choose not to go there then. And I think that there's different ways to look at that. And I think that the online portion of hunter education, that option existing out there, does hit some of that other segment that does have some interest, but they're not willing to miss basketball or volleyball or whatever activity it is. But they still want to participate in the outdoors. And so while we're still seeing the majority of students take the in-person class, there has been an increase of the online portion that's out there, and I think we're only going to continue to see that. And I'm very satisfied actually too with the instruction that is provided in the online. I think everybody was maybe a little nervous up front about that, about how that was going to look at the end, but I've been pretty satisfied with having actually a couple of my kids take the online portion when we were in the pandemic as far as that level of instruction, which I thought was very good.
Early in January, legislative session starting.
Yeah, so this will be a first for me with my new name tag. As director of the Game and Fish, I've been involved with a lot of legislative sessions in the past, but obviously not in the director position. And so we've been, there's a lot of newness, right? From, not only just from myself, from the director, but from other department leadership positions, but then also from the legislative aspect, a lot of new legislators. And so the department took on something here this fall to where we're trying to build on some of those relationships and having some legislative touches and some various meetings that we held across the state. So that was good. And I think like anything, like we talked about earlier, just keeping those lines of communication open is extremely important. Whether we're talking about that between the department and our hunting and fishing public, or the legislators as well. So any time that they can know more about what we're doing as an agency is a good thing.
Jeb, are you hearing any potential legislation that could affect the Game and Fish Department?
So for a little while now, Mike, we've been hearing about potential legislation regarding baiting of deer, and that's something that has to do with our chronic wasting disease plan that has been in place since 2009. And when we find a positive chronic wasting disease within an area or close to a unit within that 25 miles, the department puts restriction on baiting to try to limit that, that congregation that takes place when you are purposely putting bait out over the landscape. And so we're trying to be responsible as an agency to reduce that if at all possible. And we know that's an irritant to some folks that do like to hunt over bait. And so we have heard that is going to be a potential legislative item here this session.
Jeb, heading into 2023, weather really dictates what the landscape's going to look like.
It does, and it always does in North Dakota. And so far, we're looking like we're maybe going to be dealt with a bit of a tough winter, which can mean tough things for wildlife on the landscape and people too. But it also means potentially that, again, a healthy landscape when the snow and winter breaks. Wetlands full, lakes charged, good habitat conditions on the landscape when spring, finally does hit. And so there's opportunities and challenges associated with both of those. But as of right now, it looks like, we're going to be in for a little bit of a tough winter.
A lot of great information, Jeb. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.